Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third event in the Way to San Jose Get Career Ready series. This series was designed for new international graduate students, but of course is open to all who are interested in career tips and resources as an international student. My name is Julia Dunn, and I am the Graduate Enrollment Support Specialist in the College of Graduate Studies. My colleague, Carrie McKnight, is a career counselor here in the SJSU Career Center, and we're really excited to welcome all of you for today's event, Succeed in the Global Workplace. We have special guest Damon Moon on the call. Welcome, Damon. Please note, everybody, that we are recording this session, and you're welcome to leave your cameras on or off, but I think if you leave your cameras on, you will end up in the recording that we will then post to the College of Graduate Studies website. So feel free to leave your cameras on or off and stay muted until the end once we'll have time for questions. And I'll turn it over to Carrie now to introduce herself and introduce Damon.
Okay, terrific. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our session. Again, this is the last of our series for this semester on Get Career Ready. Again, I'm Carrie McKnight, one of the career counselors in the Career Center at San Jose State, and my main role is to work with graduate students. And a couple little housekeeping things. I've already shared in the chat and I'll reshare it. Please sign in on the Google form in the chat. That way we can keep track of those who are attending today, and we'll have your contact information for future follow-up after today's event. Okay, so it's my honor today to introduce our guest speaker, Damon Moon. Damon spent the first decade of his career in management and consulting, helping tech clients find new business opportunities and improve their bottom line. Recently, he worked at Samsung, where he created an internal open innovation program called Samsung Open. Currently, he's a lecturer at the Lucas College of Business at San Jose State, and that's how Julia and I became connected with Damon. And he's teaching global dimensions of business. Outside of being a lecturer, he also runs a startup that helps college students make meaningful relationships with classmates on their digital-first college experience. Damon holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Seoul National University, and he also has a master's degree in business administration from UCLA Anderson. He lives here in the Bay Area with his wife and children, and in his free time, Damon enjoys mountain biking and podcasting. So we are going to go ahead. Again, thank you all of you for joining us today, and we'll just go ahead and turn over to Damon. As Julia mentioned, later on in the presentation, we will take time for questions, but please fill out the Google form and you can just post questions in chat, and Julie and I will address your questions a little later on. So welcome, Damon. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm really excited to be here. Good evening and maybe good morning for people who are joining in from Asia. Let me start off with my own story. It was 2006 and I arrived in Shanghai back in 2006. I wanted to learn the Chinese language and culture. So just went to Shanghai and found myself a room in front of one of the most prestigious universities in China. I was finishing up my college and I went there to study. And it felt like it was like my last chance to do something crazy and explore new cultures. So on the first day, I woke up early and walked into this beautiful campus of Fudan University and started wandering around the school. And there's a saying that if you want to know or predict where the nation is going, you might want to look at the libraries of that school. So I was trying to find my way to the library. It was 6:30 a.m. and I found a lot of people around a pond reciting BBC News in English. A lot of Chinese students were reciting that. So I was very curious. And so I asked in Chinese, 今天有考试吗? That means, do you have a test today? And they replied something that I could not understand. And this one guy who responded, I asked him, okay, how can I get to the library? And he asked me if I had breakfast, and I didn't. So we ended up going to the cafeteria and abandoned the library plan. And that's how I got to know Rikai. And that's how the friendship started. And it's crazy that I still keep in touch with him. And he happened to be also living in the Bay Area after all these years. But I couldn't really rely my whole entire Shanghai experience on this one person. So I decided to scale this. So what ended up happening was I went and created this banner that read something like this. 教汉语学汉语. It means teach Chinese and learn Korean for free. So created this ad. I created a beautiful PowerPoint with all the Korean basics, how to pronounce the basic characters and just some greeting words. And I got so many people reach out to me, and I ended up having 10 people back to back, one-on-one tutoring, learning Chinese and teaching Korean with them. So it was an amazing experience for me to step out of my comfort zone and learn the language and learn the new culture. In fact, I was an international student without actually being officially a part of this Fudan University. So when I contrast that with experience in the world that we live today, I think because a lot of the education has gone online, it's really difficult to connect with students, connect with people, and it really immerse and embrace the different cultures that's going on around you. And I just love meeting new people, especially from different cultures. So that's what brings me to what I'm doing today. So I teach, as Carrie mentioned, Global Dimensions of Business at San Jose State. And I'm a founder of a startup that helps people connect with one another at a deeper level, especially in the online first education era that we are all experiencing today. So today's topic is succeeding in the global workplaces of tomorrow. And I broke this down into two pieces. Okay, what are the changes that are happening in the workplace? What changes do they need to have in the workplaces based on what we know already? And two, based on that, assuming that is true, what are the skills that you need in order to succeed in the global workplaces of tomorrow? So starting with the first one, what are the changes that the companies will experience in the future that is becoming more global? So they would need to be more global, more entrepreneurial, and more relational. Okay, let me explain one by one why this is going to happen. So first off, with more global, companies are already assuming a global user base. If you look at the products, the number of products out there, there's so many products. There are more products than ever. And if you just look at the Apple App Store, there are 2.2 million apps on the Apple App Store. And that's a smaller app store. If you look at the Android Google Play Store, it's even larger. And because of this fragmented nature of the products, not just apps, in anything that we experience, they inevitably have to look at the global market. If you look at how the world has changed over these years, there used to be similar products based on different geographies. So let's say you had a ketchup. You sell Heinz ketchup in the US. And in Korea, there's another ketchup company that sells ketchup for the Korean market. In Japan, there's another ketchup company and so forth, right? But these days, as the products become more digital and online, you have one product that does one or two things really good, and that's a global product. So what ends up happening is, as a company or a consumer, you end up experiencing a lot of the different products that is inherently global. And the technologies are enabling companies or products to go on that path. So that's one of the things that's really happening. Companies are assuming a global workplace. Second part is the talent pools are becoming more globally diversified, and we see this especially through the pandemic. We see a lot of the talent being hired or contracted out through Upwork or TopTal, and this is not just the Bay Area. A lot of U.S. companies are discovering that it's equally effective or even better to work with remote workforce through these contracting gig economy platforms. And if you walk into when you walk into any Silicon Valley company, you will see people that are from many, many different cultural backgrounds, and that trend will only increase in the future. And this is not just U.S. companies. Companies that are outside the U.S. are also heading towards that direction. So talent pools are becoming really globally diversified. And number three, global partnerships and operations that are becoming more essential to most businesses. Maybe it took several decades for a company to succeed domestically and then think about going global afterwards. But these days, as I mentioned, companies are assuming a global user base. You have to think globally from day one. So a lot of these seemingly new startups, Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, they all have a global user base. And as these companies grow internationally, they need people who can navigate the different, not just the language, but also the culture and the different nuance on what works and what doesn't based on that cultural context for that business. So companies will need to be more global to survive in the future. Two, companies will need to be more entrepreneurial. When I mention about entrepreneurial, it's not just about creating companies or creating new businesses. It's also about taking initiatives and solving problems. Business environment has changed rapidly. And if there's anything that we learned from 2020, it's about being resilient. So companies are required to become more agile and resilient. And how do you do that? They can't really rely on, okay, here's a big 5-year master plan. It took 6 months for us to create it. The world changes in the 6 months that they're creating that plan. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that companies would want to be more flexible. They can't really hire a workforce and really expect them to stay there for a longer period of time. So if you look at a talent pool, there are specialists who are really deep into one or two areas, and the companies will contract out to these specialists, and people who they hire will be more generalists who can be more flexible and versatile. And they want people who can identify new problems and solve them. This means that they want people who can really learn fast and adapt to the changing environment. And all of these aspects, being flexible and being able to identify problems and solve the problems, these are all aspects of being entrepreneurial. And the third aspect is companies needs to be more relational. And if you look at how the companies operate these days, there's a lot of people there are a lot of companies who are removing people from their processes for efficiency's sake, for cost reduction and so forth. But as we go through that, as companies go through that process, and then there will be higher value placed on actual personal interactions. And I think that trend will continue. So automation happens on one end, but there's more value in the actual in-person relationships. So this really changes the why we work, how we work, and the type of work that we're doing. So as companies become more automated, the employees are seeking a community. The users are seeking a community of users. Developers, the same thing, and partners. So it really becomes a key differentiator. As you automate some parts of the company, you also want to have people who can win the hearts of the users, employees, developers, and partners for that company. And also changing how we work together. We all experience that collaborating remotely and globally is the new norm. So even when we are not in person, how do we communicate with others, and how do we build trust with others, and how do we motivate others? That is going to be the key in really operating in this remote environment. And the third aspect is the type of work that we do is changing. In the past, maybe it was quite repetitive, manufacturing the same things over and over again, but a lot of those work will be automated and replaced by robots. The work that would be done with people, with talent, would be creative work and some that are more customized. And that heavily relies on creativity and motivation. And how do you have the creativity and motivation? you can't really have more creativity by paying more or more of a command and order type of environment. You have to have the relational skills to draw out that creativity and draw out that motivation. So companies are required, they need to be more relational. And these are the types of people that these companies are looking for. And in fact, when we think about the word company, it comes from the Latin word compagne, and that is breaking bread. Breaking bread means eating together. So how do we build relationships through meals and through conversations? I think that is also a very important aspect of getting into the core of what a company is. So now with all this information, okay, how the companies will change, the companies will become more global, more entrepreneurial, and more relational. What does this mean for you? And there are 3 skills for success, soft skills for success, that I'm going to share today. And these are not types of skills that you need for your interview, specific like hard skills, whether it's coding or design skills, but it's a skill that everybody needs in the 21st century, working for a global workplace. And the 3 are the cultural skills, the innovation skills, and the relationship skills. So first, with the culture skills, have genuine respect for other cultures. This genuine respect goes both ways. So if you respect their culture, they will also respect your culture. And with that respect in mind, be a student of different cultures of the world. Maybe you can start off with a simple greeting of that different culture. And you can expand to food, the drinks, the music, the movies, and even history, and learning about their cultural history and how they became who they are today. And the third aspect is, as you build that respect and learn and be a student of that culture, you can be a cultural translator. And as I mentioned, a lot of companies are inherently going global from day one. These cultural translators are very important. And it's not just about translating language, but also translating that are very subtle and nuanced about different actions and behaviors. How did they act this way? Why didn't they say anything? All those things can be a part of the translation that you can do as you learn and respect the different cultures. And I think everyone in this Zoom room, and a lot of people who have international backgrounds, have inherent advantage because they are one foot plugged into the American culture and one foot in the other culture. So I think that's a huge advantage that you want to think about and leverage as you think about succeeding in the global workplaces of tomorrow. Second aspect is the innovation skills. When we talk about innovation, we often think about like very futuristic, very technologically focused image that we have, like VR goggles or flying cars and things like that. But innovation starts with the problem, not with the idea. So identifying what the problem is and really going into the core. What's the root cause of this problem? That is the main starting point. And if you have that, you already solved half of the problem there. So starting with the problem, defining it, and going into the root cause is the key. And as you do that, think about like, okay, whose problem is this? Is this my problem? Is this my boss's problem? Is this the company's problem? Is it the user's problem? Or the people who are not already using our product? So defining whose problem is it, that is absolutely critical. Sometimes we just focus too much on the innovation itself. Oh, this is a really cool project, that we tend to forget, okay, who's going to use this? Why would they need it? That's all not really considered. So start with the problem and always consider whose problem this is. And after you've done that, communicate the problem and open up for potential questions. So write the problem down. It's sometimes the problem is just in your mind until you write it down and write down why this is a big problem and start communicating within the company or the organization. You don't have to have all the answers yet. And I think it's important to not have the answers because then you'll be fixated on delivering your solution rather than trying to solve a problem. So create that communication channel and share your perspectives on that problem, but open up for potential solutions that can actually solve that problem. So never approach with a fixed solution in mind and find a problem that would fit your solutions. Find the problem and be open for potential problem. And I think that is innovation. And the background picture that you see here is what Carrie mentioned on Samsung Open. You can see me right here. We created this program, learning how to create the next big thing. And you can see the problem statement on the screen back there. How might we help dual income families spend their quality time with their family and loved ones? So this was a problem statement that we worked on for 6 weeks, and we came up with so many different solutions to help these family members who are really busy with a lot of work. So that was a lot of fun going through that. And third part is the relationship skills. You want to start off with listening and learning is what is important to people. I have never come across a job description that doesn't say communication skills is important. So in every job, communication skill is very important. But what exactly is a good communication skill? Who is a good communicator? And we often think about good presentation skills, good public speaking skills, which is all great, but it's not that helpful when that person doesn't really listen. So let's start off with listening and learning what is important to people around you. And the purpose of listening is not to try to find a logical flaw or something to disagree on, but learning about what is really important to them and what they care about. And I think that's a real important aspect. Sometimes we tend to forget. And the second part is love and care for them. And this feels like it's a very touchy-feely and soft concept, but love is action. And it doesn't have to be loving for people who are your just family members. It can be your subordinates, it can be your boss, it can be about loving and caring for the CEO. It can be loving and caring about your users, your developer community. It can be people who are not really interacting with you on a day-to-day basis. Listen and learn what's important to them and try to find out how you might be able to help them, and that will go a long way. And this all works because, as I mentioned, the work interaction becomes so impersonal. A lot of it is automated. People are on the other side of the Zoom call and everything's done on email. So there's the actual in-person interaction is becoming much more valuable. So loving and care for them now has more value in the workplaces of tomorrow. And the last part is leading and taking initiative. And leading doesn't always have to be, oh, I have this position, I have this title, now I have to lead. It can be, you can lead in many different aspects. Taking initiative, identifying the problem, and reaching out to people. You don't necessarily have to have a leadership title to lead. And this especially applies to a lot of the East Asian crowd, the part of Asia where I'm from. I tend to think, oh, I need to have this position, I need to have this title in order to take initiative on various aspects. But a lot of the companies here it's more of a flat culture. So raise your hand if there's an opportunity to lead. If there's an opportunity that no one's taking, hey, can I volunteer for that opportunity? I can coordinate that. And that is a demonstration, really good demonstration of leadership. So do not be afraid and be courageous and take that opportunity. And what is the worst thing that can happen, right? So that is leading and taking initiative. And that's also part of the relationship skills. So to wrap up, we looked at how the companies are changing. They're becoming more global. They have to be more entrepreneurial and more relational. And the skills that you need in order to succeed will be the cultural skills that translates different cultures, the innovation skills where you identify a problem and think about like whose problem this is and how you communicate that. And third aspect is the relationship skills where you listen, learn, love, and lead your team and the people around you. So that's my brief story about how we can think about succeeding in the global workplaces of tomorrow. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I think we have a couple questions.
There was one question. I'll go ahead and read it. Okay, my question is about global expansion, as you mentioned early in your presentation. Do you believe homogenous countries like Japan and Denmark will adapt and expand their workforce with different foreigners of different cultures? The students looking to work in Japan and just wanted some insights on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the speed will be different. And there are many reasons for that. Japan, obviously, the language is a big barrier. It's really difficult to immediately plug in if you don't know the language. So the intent to accept non-Japanese is probably there, but the reality is not there. So that's one of the major challenges that Japan faces. And also culturally, I guess, as you mentioned, it's less diverse. So it'll take longer time for countries like Japan to open up. But I think China is opening up pretty quickly with especially the larger companies in major cities in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. And it's evidenced by companies like TikTok. And it's amazing how they did more like a reverse merger with Musical.ly and absorbed Musical.ly into Douyin and then expanded globally in such a short period of time. So you'll see more of these trends, but for other countries like Japan, I think the speed of opening up their labor market will be slower than some other countries. This is actually also a problem for Korea too. Korea, the intent is there, but the language is a big barrier. The culture is a big barrier. But I think in general, the openness is probably a little bit more than Japan, and China's openness is probably even more than Korea. So I think that's very interesting to compare the three different cultures, even in East Asia.
Thanks, Damon. We have another question. A student's asking, how do you approach working with others of a different background? You have tips on that?
Different background, working with people from different cultures. I think there's the basics are respecting their culture, being a student of their culture, and becoming a cultural translator. But it's hard. You can't really learn all the different cultures out there. If there's like people from 40 different countries, like how is that going to work? It's really hard. So I think what's really important for a company, I think this is probably the key to success for a lot of the companies that succeeded globally are from the companies from US. And the key aspect of US is that US is a low context culture. What I mean by low context culture is that a lot of the things are written down. So it's not assumed, it is written down. And it's probably because for the last 3 centuries or so, there's a lot of immigrants coming into US. So unless it's really written down, it was very difficult to communicate and assume what they mean, what their intent is. But homogeneous cultures, for example, like Japan and Korea, it's a very high context culture. So you just have to feel the air and understand what the intent is and just do it. And I grew up in that culture, so I know exactly how that is. And the key thing here is that it's, even if Korea and Japan are both high context cultures, their way of communicating nonverbal cues are going to be different. So high context and high context cultures are not compatible. So key here is writing down your expectation and verbalizing that and communicating that so that people from different cultures can work together and agree on something that's common. I think that is really important.
Great, thank you. We have another question. What are some ways you reached out and met new people when you were in Shanghai?
What are some other ways I reached out? Okay. Yeah, I can go for several hours on my adventures in Shanghai. So my purpose of the Shanghai trip was to meet new people, learn the language, and learn the culture there. Okay, how am I going to do this? I originally signed up for a language program in Fudan University, and through Rikai, the friend that I met on that pond at 6:30 a.m., he told me his tuition was $500 for the whole entire year. I was paying $2,000 for a 3-week language program. And I thought, this is a steal. So I canceled that. And then I started just knocking on doors. So I went to my neighbor's house. There was a grandma, and that grandma didn't speak any English. So I just had to learn how to speak. I had a dictionary on one hand and hand waving on the other to get her to teach me Tai Chi. So I did that for a couple of weeks in the morning. And then I expanded my boundaries a little bit more. So, okay, one hand, I have a dictionary on one hand. I went to the department stores, and I wasn't a student. I wasn't working. So I just had all the time that I had. So I just started from level 1, go into every single store, pick a random object, and ask a simple question. What is this? And then the second question is, why is it so expensive? Third question is, can you give me a discount? And the people who worked there started laughing, and we had a good conversation. If there's any word that I don't know, I would just look at my dictionary and start writing down the words that I don't know. And if I had enough conversation, I would go to the next store in that department store until I went to all 7 floors of that department store. And there are many department stores in Shanghai. So I did that for almost the whole month. And then after that got boring, I started going to real estate. And not at this point, my Chinese conversation it's much more advanced now. And I'm telling stories, which is not completely fake story, but I'm telling them, okay, I want to buy a property in Shanghai. Can foreigners do that? And if so, how can I manage that property from Korea? How much is it? Again, why is it so expensive? Can you break a deal? So that was a really good way to learn the language and get plugged into the culture there. A lot of people that I met was through those interactions in Shanghai, and it wasn't necessarily okay. I became immediate friends with these real estate agents, but it was really good opportunity to meet. One more thing that I wanted to mention is Toastmasters Club. Toastmasters Club is a great way to meet new people and network. And I was involved in Toastmasters Club before going to Shanghai. And one of the benefits of Toastmasters Club is that it's all over the world. There's probably more than 170,000 clubs all around the world. Every major city has tens of different clubs out there. And when I went to one of them, it was conducted in English, and that was the year when they branched out to a Chinese version of a Toastmasters Club. It's a public speaking club where there's a fixed agenda, and people come up and speak in public with a group of 30 people. It's really cool. It's a peer-to-peer learning. There's no teachers. Everybody learns from one another, and it's a great way to learn communication skills and leadership skills in a risk-free way. So if anyone of you is interested, please look into that. Actually, I found one in San Jose State. It's every Mondays, 7:30, so 7:30 p.m. I highly recommend you joining either that club, or there's a ton of other clubs that is around San Jose, or whichever city you are living in. So go to toastmasters.org, and then there's like a find the club, and you'll be able to find the club there. It's really a great group of people that will support you, encourage you, motivate you in every single way.
Those are great tips. Thank you, Damon. Somebody is curious, how many languages can you speak?
So English and Korean. Chinese, I can get by. Getting by meaning I can buy things, I can grab a taxi, I can go and order things in the at the restaurant, but not at a business level. So those three. And I was living in Brazil for some time, so Brazil, I can't say I'm speaking the language, but I found a way to make friends. So I know just enough to make friends, and they helped me a lot. So maybe 3.1 languages. No, 2.5 if I add them up. But I'm actually, my dad speaks like five different languages. So when I just compare myself with my dad, I can never catch up. But he had a different advantage. He lived in France, and he worked at a Japanese company. So yeah, I didn't. So he had an unfair advantage, I guess.
Okay, thanks. So next question here is, what do you think the future of Silicon Valley will be with so many businesses leaving the area?
That's a good question. I think Silicon Valley is going through a change. So Silicon Valley was initially for the semiconductor business, right? So semiconductor business came in and was the dominant industry here, but we barely see any semiconductor business anymore. A lot of it is software. There's silicon and software. It's completely two different worlds. So Silicon Valley went through these changes, and now there's biotech, there's electric vehicles. So it's a combination of many different industries. So when I just think about, okay, there are companies leaving, yeah, companies will leave, but there'll be new companies that will fill in this area. So I don't think the Silicon Valley will become like Detroit in the next 10 to 20 years. Maybe it will eventually become like Detroit if you look at like 300 years time span. But at least in the next 10 to 20 years, I don't think it's going to go through a change, but it's not going to be, it feels so empty here. It's still going to be a hotbed for innovation, hotbed for investment, hotbed for startups. That's my view. But I think you bring up a good point. I think the gap between Silicon Valley and others, I think it was pretty stark. But I think that could be a little bit more leveled now, as you can actually work with a remote team, distributed team. So you don't actually have to be in Silicon Valley to succeed. You can be anywhere, as long as you're plugged in to the right people and with the right connections with the investors.
Thanks, Damon. We have a few more questions in the chat,
Yeah.
but I do want to take a moment to ask if anybody would like to ask their question live and unmute. I'll allow space for that right now if anybody wants to unmute and ask a live question. Otherwise, you can pop your questions in the chat.
Yeah, and I'm sharing my LinkedIn address here, so feel free to friend me on LinkedIn, and you can message me for questions outside of this forum. So feel free to do that.
Great, thanks, Damon. Someone's asking, how popular is Alibaba in China? Are local companies interested in these sites for global business or only small to medium-sized business? I don't know if you can speak to that.
How popular is Alibaba in China? Are local companies interested in sites for global businesses? So I don't know too much about Alibaba. When I was in China, Alibaba was there, but it wasn't as big as what we see now. And the landscape completely changed. Back then, the internet was not available in many of the homes. So I would have to go to internet cafe to access the internet. And obviously a lot of phones were just flip phones or Nokia phones back then. Now, a lot of things have changed. And I haven't been to China since 2008. I went once again. Oh, actually, I went there a couple of years ago too, but I didn't do a ton of research on Alibaba. It is a pretty big business, and it's not. They have many different e-commerce brands, so it's not just Alibaba.com. There's several others, and was it a couple of days ago? Yesterday, a couple of days ago, it was Singles Day, and they had the again record-breaking volume on the purchases on the Singles Day, which is, it's almost like Black Friday, but probably 100 times bigger and crazier. So I guess how popular is Alibaba in China? If you look at the different brands and aggregate it, it's really popular. Global companies are local companies interested in those sites for a global business, or only to small to mid-sized businesses? I think right now it is mostly buying and reselling. So a lot of these Amazon, fulfilled by Amazon merchants will buy things on Alibaba and then repackage it and sell it on Amazon, or rebrand it and sell it on Amazon. So that's ongoing, but I think there are other websites that I never experienced. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Okay, Brian, you can respond to the chat there. So we have a fun question here about traveling. How would you recommend traveling on a low budget? Is this something that you've experienced, and how long did you generally travel for?
That's a great question. Traveling on a low budget.
So any tips for budget travel from your experience?
Let me think about it. I probably didn't experience super low budget travel. I traveled with my parents, and it wasn't a low. It wasn't like a high budget travel, but I relied on their budget. It was not my budget. And the China trip was, I was working before the China trip, so it wasn't completely low budget, but it was it was budgeted. So I had a certain amount of money. Um, I was just living there. I lived there for about 3 months. So it was traveling, but I wasn't constantly moving. I rented a house, an apartment to live for 3 months. This is where I did all the tutoring and so forth. So, but I think the world has changed right now, and there are so-called digital nomads. So you're traveling, but you're also working at the same time. So you're working on these remote working platforms, whether as a designer or social media or a programmer, on things that you can do remotely, or even YouTube vlogging, and people would travel 1 month or 2 months at a time, book an Airbnb, stay there for a couple months and move on. I think that's becoming a new trend. So a lot of people who don't have family and who don't have kids, who have to go to school, are going through the digital nomadic experiences. And one of the things that I found really interesting was that especially the countries in South America, Argentina in this case, their currency is being depreciated pretty quickly. So if you can earn dollars through these remote work, and you're living in Argentina for 2 months, 3 months at a time, the economics work out pretty well. It's amazing. I saw Airbnb for $10, $15 in a city center in Argentina. So if you're thinking about budget travel, think about those countries where the currency is depreciating quickly, and see if you can work at the same time as you are going through those countries.
Thanks, Damon. This is a really interesting question. What are your insights towards how the pandemic will affect Silicon Valley in the long term?
Mm-hmm. Insights towards Silicon Valley in the long term. There's so many different aspects for this economical, psychological, the different industries that we are talking about here. The short answer is that I don't know. I don't know what will happen, how it will affect Silicon Valley in the long term. I think it's really difficult to predict anything. But I think what's clear is the workplace, the behaviors in the workplace is changing. And it's not just a temporary thing. It has more of a long-term impact. And that is, we can actually get the work done remotely. So that's one of the things that are coming into the minds of the leadership in Silicon Valley. Obviously, there are things that you absolutely need to be together to get the work done, but it doesn't have to be 100% of the people who need to be there all at the same time to get the work done. Some of these work can be done remotely. Okay, so if you need to be remote, please go ahead. So that's part one. Now, part two is, okay, what's the impact of these people who are working remotely? On the short term, it's flexibility. It's great. I can be in San Diego. I can be in Argentina in these $10 Airbnb and really enjoy my South American life here in Argentina. But that also means, okay, Damon, why does it have to be you? I mean, I can find someone who is like 10 times cheaper than you. Like, why do I have to pay Silicon Valley prices? And I know you're in Argentina right now, so I don't think that's fair. Then that means the stability of the job is going away. So overall, I think the stability, or at least somewhat of a stability that we had in Silicon Valley, I think compared to other countries, the stability was already quite low. There's always reorgs going on. It's really hard to imagine working for over 3 to 5 year time frame, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. So I think the stability or the stability is going down, volatility is going up for these jobs in Silicon Valley. So what does that mean for the people who are studying and trying to prepare themselves for the workforce? And I think a lot of it goes back to what I just mentioned. Do you have the innovation skills? Do you have the entrepreneurial skills that the companies would want, so that you can be selective when you're going after those companies and deliver value to them, but you also have the ability to create your own organization, your own venture, so that the location doesn't really matter. I think that's the implication that I see as a long-term impact of the pandemic, especially in Silicon Valley.
Okay, great. So I think we have time maybe just for a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
There's one here for you. Earlier you mentioned that you lecture in global dimensions. In terms of global expansion, what are your thoughts about different cultural backgrounds and the idea of economic development, for example, labor laws? Does that affect business communication?
Yes, I lecture in what's called global dimensions of business. I'm trying to understand like the context here. Global expansion, what are your thoughts on global cultural backgrounds, economic development? So thoughts on global, different cultural backgrounds and the culture. I spent the whole 3 hour on the culture aspect of it. And I worked at obviously companies in Korea and US companies here, Korean companies expanding into the US. And when I think about all these business opportunities, all these technologies, and all these great ideas, what really makes or break the thinking and all the money and the time and effort that goes into these hopes is culture. So if you have a really good culture, it will stick. But if you don't, even if it's a great idea, even if it's a great technology, even if it's the world's best people, if you don't have the right culture, then it just breaks, and it's just a waste of money. And I witnessed that like right in front of my eyes. So I think the most important thing of global expansion is the culture. How do you get the culture right? And it's not like you have a formula. Okay, if you have this formula, or if you just follow these 5 steps, then you will have a good culture. It's very intangible, and it's very hard to get it right. And a lot of companies who got it right almost stumbled upon it, not necessarily intentionally built that culture. So even if with a lot of good intentions, it's really hard to get the culture right. So it's a really important topic. It's a big topic without a lot of clear guidelines on the different cultural backgrounds. But what I can say is, going back to what I mentioned, respecting other cultures, learning their cultural backgrounds, and really writing them down on what, from company's perspective. You can't really do this on a personal perspective. Okay, this is the culture that I'm going to operate in. But at a company level, okay, this is what we stand for. This is how we're going to operate, and this is what we value. And let's really stick to that and really communicate that from leadership all the way down. And that is probably the only way to align those cultures. And otherwise, it's really difficult. There's also one more nuance to this, is that companies do this, but at a personal level, some people are starting to write something that's called, I think, it's like a manual of me. So it's, let's say if you become a manager, this is how you operate. So this is your expectations. So some people are more open to, let's say, coming in late or leaving early, things like that. If you're really annoyed by that, really write them down and really clarify what your expectation is for all the other team members to operate in. So so that's also another part of culture. If you write it down, it becomes more clear on the expectations of different people. Now, if you start writing down all these different pieces, then some of them will clash and some of them will not. So it is also a balance of being flexible and also clarifying their expectations. So different culture is very, very important and hard to solve. Economic development, labor laws affect business communication. Absolutely, different geographies, different countries have different labor laws and what they can say and what they cannot say. So it's very different. So it's really important to understand the legal boundaries of what they are, and really adhering to that is the complexity that we're living in. So big companies can afford to have knowledge and access to the lawyers for all the different processes. Smaller companies, unfortunately, don't. So I think that's the challenge of companies today. How do you globalize and operate in so many different countries with so many different cultures, with all the legal aspects different? How do I cannot assume just my own legal background and knowledge of the culture or the legal systems that I'm operating in. I need to also understand their legal systems. Otherwise, it's going to be very problematic. And I've seen a lot of those mistakes happen right in front of my eyes too.
Thanks,
Hope
Damon.
that answers your question. Mm-hmm.
It looks like we've got one last question that'll take us towards the end of our hour. What country or industry do you see becoming the next big thing?
Wow, that's a $1 billion question. I like thinking about the next big thing, and I think the next big thing, we're just starting to see the next big thing is mobile video, and we obviously saw the growth of TikTok, but TikTok is just a tip of the iceberg, and mobile video is something that has a lot of potential, and we're still not there yet. Okay, we have YouTube, we have TikTok, we have all these education videos and so forth, but it's still very difficult to create videos. And as much as it's appealing, we still don't see a lot of communication done on recorded video. And why is that? So I see a lot of opportunities how you can create videos quickly and easily. And that could also mean two different things. And let's say something like this could happen, right? I just write a script and I have my 3D model in the computer. So I can make Damon speak without me actually speaking in a very, very realistic form. And that is, I think, what's going to happen. How you create videos, how you create content with less effort and with more having it more natural. And there are a lot of other aspects too in terms of storytelling. Gaming is a format of storytelling, and a lot of it is 3D, and it's created. So how do you tell the story with this figure people that are computer generated? How can that be more realistic? And now we're talking about a whole movie industry that you can create just by telling the software what to do and scripting what it wants, what the character should do. And I think that's something that's compelling, and there's a lot of potential in that aspect. Daniel, if you come up with that idea, please tell me too, so that I can invest in that idea.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of the questions and come to the end of our session here. Thank you so much, Damon, for joining us and speaking with our students this evening or morning, wherever you are in the world. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and your knowledge and sharing with our students. Julia put in the chat that this session is recorded, so you can view the session again if you'd like to get some more tips and information and review that. It'll be posted online. We're also going to be following up with students with a survey about our Get Career Ready series. So check out your email for that, and we appreciate your feedback. I know, Julia, if you had any other closing comments, or Damon, any other closing comments?
I just want to thank Damon again for his time tonight, and to everybody who attended and asked questions. Thank you. As Carrie mentioned, we will be following up with attendees of any of our Way to San Jose Get Career Ready events with a survey to find out more about what you liked, what you wished you had known more about, and that'll help us shape future events. So thank you all.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and messaging. I'm happy to chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.